Hello, everyone. This is Ian from the Fourth Place, and I am not alone. Welcome to the companion show of our live D&D campaign, Heroes of Four Worlds. This is D&D 101. This week is really special. Sometimes the show is just me teaching D&D and some RPG basics with a little bit of Q&A. But this week, Clove is here to teach us all about upping our roleplay game. You there?
Hey.
Yes. Hey, Clove.
Hey, everyone.
It's cool to have you here, not in character, in a different context. It's also nice not to be alone, so welcome.
Thank you. Sometimes I just need to take a break from all that edginess. So.
Yeah, girl. Before we kick off properly with your presentation and your talk, I have a few announcements for everybody. So first up, actually, here, I'm going to even put a different card on the screen because I remembered. So first up, schedule stuff. After this live conversation, we're going to run an encore of episode 2, which is what we do on the off weeks. So you get the live D&D 101 and you get the encore replay of the most recent episode so you can stay caught up if you missed it last week. Next week is the 4th of July. Some of the players and likely a lot of the audience, you guys won't be able to join us on a holiday Saturday. So we're going to be running sort of a big mega encore. I'm going to run the first episode of D&D 101, which should be enough so you can kind of understand the first 2 episodes if you don't know D&D, and then both of the first 2 episodes. So there'll be a nice long thing to watch. I'll probably be in and out of the chat. The more people around, the more likely I'll be in. That's next Saturday. 2 weeks from now, on July 11th, we're going to be back with the whole crew for a live episode 3 of Heroes of Four Worlds. Let's see, we're in the Halls of Prophecy, so things should be getting interesting. And there's every chance that the crew, the party, will be on the world during that episode. The week after that, we'll be back with D&D 101 Live. The week after that, a new episode, and so on. So every other week as normal after that. We are always here on this very Twitch channel, or if you're watching this later as a rerun, on our Twitch channel, which is fourth.me/Twitch, Saturdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific, and a whole bunch of other time zones, because that's how time zones work. Let's see, what have I got next? The fundraiser. Actually, let me see if I can. So we are running a Color of Change fundraiser. So if you go to fourth.me/Color of Change, you can donate directly to Color of Change in a way that will, get counted in our big goal of reaching $1,000. However, there is another way to give. Every penny you spend on the Fourth Place shop, which is fourth.me, that's it, or the fourthplaceforgeeks.com, or fourthplacegames.com, or etc. Every dollar you spend there or on our Patreon will be put directly into the fundraiser. Literally, if you sign up for the Patreon for $3 a month to get all of our digital content, I will immediately put $3 into the fundraiser. If you buy a $60 game, I'll immediately put $60 into the fundraiser. It's every penny. It's not what lands in our bank account. It's what you spend, because we think this is important. I mentioned this earlier for anyone who caught the announcement. The whole idea of using using Color of Change for this and doing this fundraiser for Color of Change is they're really good at getting the message out there, and a lot of people seem pretty tired. They seem not to be as active as they were a couple weeks ago. I really think that they're the perfect charity, the perfect group to keep this conversation alive. So that's the reasoning behind that. It's important. Black Lives Matter is a very simple statement and something we can't forget. So that's the fundraiser. Finally, just some quick Twitch stuff. We did make affiliate real quickly, thanks to all of you who are watching. Following is still a huge help, obviously. You can now also subscribe to this channel. It's real easy. If you're an Amazon Prime user, you may not know this, but you can get your first subscription every month for free. So you can click the sub button and you get a paid subscription, but Amazon pays for it because they own Twitch, but we still get the money, which helps us keep doing this, which is pretty sweet. Also, we have all the new stuff is set up. So we have subscriber emotes, point rewards, bit and cheer rewards. Please try them out in the chat. If you have access to them, please get access to them. If you don't, that should be fun. I've talked way too much in a row. That's luckily what the rest of the show is not going to be about. So now I'm going to make sure. Yep, we've got the first slide of the presentation up. I've stopped rambling. Yeah, that's it. So Clove, it is time for your part of the show. Everyone welcome Clove, who is one of the best role players I know. Plays characters who are distinctly different people acts like them, thinks like them, and I got to sneak preview some of these slides and what this talk was going to be like, and I'm excited.
Hey everyone, I'm really glad to be here today. I've been role playing for a while. I played my first Dungeons and Dragons game back in high school, like junior, senior year timeline. And I started LARPing. Well, I started role playing freshman year in a DeviantArt roleplay forum, which was an experience, and I learned a lot. And I guess that dates me a bit. And now I've moved on to LARPing. I started doing that my senior year of college. And spoiler alert, I'm in my mid-20s. So it's been about 5 years since I've started role playing. And along the way, I've picked up some really helpful tips for how to role play, just because a problem a lot of people run into is like finding a character that they feel comfortable role playing. So like, let's dive into it. So first of all, I want to talk about what this talk is not. And so this isn't going to be a talk about how to do accents for your Dungeons and Dragons character or for your LARPing character. I'm sure there are plenty of YouTube videos out there for such a thing. And this also isn't going to be a talk on what classes you should play or what backgrounds you should play or what D&D species are easiest to roleplay or best. I'm not going to tell you what to do. But what I am going to tell you to do is I want you guys to create a character that you all feel comfortable role-playing. So my old DM and I were chatting recently, and he mentions that his current players created these characters with these beautiful, intricate backstories.
I've done that.
Yeah, but they just were not playing out smoothly. And it was because these people wrote these like very detailed characters, but the backstories were just so complex and so intricate, and the players didn't have any real emotional connection to these backstories, that it was just too far of a leap for them. It's like they were really good writers, so they could write out a thorough backstory, but when it came to playing it, that was a whole nother level. So today we're going to be talking about making intricate backstories that you can actually role play. So our agenda for today, we're going to be talking about what are your core values and how do we pull from that to create realistic LARP characters. We are going to talk about using some of D&D Beyond's features. Thanks, D&D Beyond.
Not a sponsor unless they want to be.
Not a sponsor, but like, thanks. Pull from backgrounds, bonds, ideals, and flaws to deepen and flesh out that character. And then we're also going to talk about something called bleed, which is when the boundary between you and your character gets kind of hazy.
When feelings move across that line, especially, I think.
Absolutely, and we'll go more into that when we get to it. So, for the core, who are you as a person? What are things that have shaped you, that have defined you? What are intense experiences that you have had or that people who are very, very close to you, friends, family, have had that you can accurately play out? So, and like being self-aware is really helpful when you're creating a LARP character, because when you're first starting off, it's really difficult to create someone who's different from you. So let's start with the core of who you are. And then let's pull from that core to make a character. So I take these core traits that you have, attribute them to your character, and this character is you, but a slightly different. What do you want to change when you play this character? For example, for my first LARP character that I ever played, her name is Alana. I was Growing up, I grew up surrounded by my younger brother and a bunch of his friends. And at that point, I developed, I was pretty motherly as a person. Me, Clove, was motherly. I'm an elder sister. I was a caregiver to younger friends and cousins. I wanted to try being the youngest for once. And actually playing out Alana and like given that hardcore younger sister vibe, I guess I come off as a bit bratty now. Oops.
Uh,
what was
but
that?
no, I just think that's yeah. So you're talking about something that I've played with too, which is you
Mm-hmm.
to really play a character, and that's in a LARP or at a tabletop game where you want to be able to put yourself in their shoes. You know, not just like get the stats and stuff right, but be able to act as them and do what they would do and sound like them, feel like them. Uh,
Absolutely.
you're onto something here where like most of this person should be you, but if it's all you, it's not role playing. You. Right. And so
Absolutely.
finding those key differences, that thing that's going to be flipped on its head or turned upside down or changed, I think is a really great way to get a character who's a complete person because they're like you, but they're not you, so it's actually a character. It's fictional. It's you get to grow into that space. I
Mhm.
really like that.
And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. Um, Starting off as you, but in a fantasy world, and then based on that character's decisions, just going down a whole different route, and it's just you surviving different experiences and acting different ways. That's a lot of people's first characters in a LARPing world, and that's really helpful and really easy, and it builds that LARPing experience. And once you've done that, then you can go on to do pull more and more and more and change the character that you're playing further from yourself, starting further away. But
Hmm.
as with all skills, it's something you've got to develop and something you've got to work on in order to get good at it. So going back to that first LARP character, I knew that to I wanted to get over my fear of the dark by playing Alana. And this is a LARP in the middle of bumfuck middle of nowhere, where me and a bunch of friends run out in the middle of the woods, and we're getting chased by zombies at like 2 in the morning. So I have a fear of the dark. Me, Clove, has a fear of the dark. I wanted to make sure that Alana didn't have this fear of the dark, and I built that into her character as a core trait that was different from me. So, um,
My first
core,
LARP character, he had my biggest fear turned on its head, so I was really afraid of being blind, and he was blind, and I wore a blindfold at the LARP. Little
wow,
secret I could sort of see through. I didn't want to bump into stuff, but to just play someone who was in that situation that I was afraid of was something I wanted to confront. And it sounds very similar like that.
yeah, you'll meet a lot of LARPers who play stuff like that. It's really cool. But so, pulling from my character, Alana was Clove. She was every little bit me that I have, but she was also, instead of being afraid of the dark, she loved the dark. Instead of being an eldest sister, she was the youngest of three. Um, and those were definitely some of the bigger ones. There were a few other differences. They're less important. But going on this fear of the dark, keep in mind I'm putting myself in a real dark situation. I am out in those real life woods trying to role play this, and you can pull this back to a D&D tabletop situation. What if you're trying to role play something that's really different from your character, like from your personal character as your D&D character,
Hmm.
and
For instance, it's hard to play someone who really isn't someone who's really okay with confrontation if you aren't, right? It's really going to be hard to even
exactly.
pretend to argue or confront or get in someone's face or to have someone get in your face. And
Yeah,
so creating a character that is enough like you that you can put yourself in their shoes and enough difference to grow on. Yeah. It doesn't have to
exactly.
be physical stuff like whether you're in the dark or in the woods. It can be the situations that you're going to be in.
Exactly, and thank you so much for saying that. To bring it back to my story, my fear of the dark ended up being too intense and too deeply ingrained for me to roleplay not having that fear. It wasn't something I could pretend away, or I don't like the word pretend, but we're using it here.
Act or pretend, yeah.
Yeah. Generally I'm a method actor. We'll talk about that later. But in this case, it wasn't something I could method act away. I wasn't just suddenly unafraid of the dark just because my character was. And in this case, the goal that I had originally set out, like not having that fear of the dark as my LARP character, I failed. And you know what? That's totally okay. It just meant that I had to, okay, what do I do with this failure? Like, what do I do with this misalignment between me and my character?
Yeah, and it's not, and we talked about this a little bit in prepping. I don't, you know, failure is the right word, but it's also not, because it's not a failure state, I guess is what I mean. It's not an end state. It's not a loss, right?
It's absolutely not a loss.
It's something to adjust to, right? So
it's an opportunity for growth.
Right. There's no winning and losing in role playing. You're trying to tell a good story. And so when something doesn't go as planned, that's an opportunity. And that sounds cheesy, but it's, you now get to do something new. You get to roll, you get to adapt. I would say this, if role playing were writing, we wouldn't need each other to do it, right? Like the fact that it's live, the fact that it's interactive, the fact that it can surprise everyone involved is what makes it good. Those surprises at the table are victories, not losses.
Yep. So how did I deal with this, like, seeming conflict, conflict of interest between me and my character? So shift the narrative. And that's really huge. She was okay. She was okay in the woods at night. And the way that we dealt with that was when she came to this town that most of the roleplay happened in, she had a few bad run-ins with some undead, and she gained some trauma. Thank you, trauma!
Trauma equals drama equals good stories, sometimes, unfortunately.
The narrative shifted from her being good in the dark as like a backstory aspect to trying to regain that comfort in the night.
Mm-hmm.
And that ended up being a much better growth point for me.
Yeah. What I like about that is it's not a retcon. Your backstory was she was good in the dark, and it's still true that she was good. It's just that she hadn't, time is hard. Sorry, tenses don't work. And I like that, because you're not having to like scrap everything you came up with. You're having to really elaborate on it, make it, you're painting in more detail, not erasing things that you came up with.
Yeah. So that's a way of dealing with these situations as you come up, because little bumps in your backstory, it's gonna happen. So when you think about developing your character, I think it's really helpful to ask questions about them. And this might be like a writer's tool trick. When you have a particular thing that you're trying to flesh out in a story, you just start asking questions about them. So I'll bring up this character I used to play. She was, oh my God, I love her. My granny orc barbarian, Edith, on a quest to find her grandson. If I keep doing this too long, I'm going to switch into her voice, and we're going to try and avoid that this time around.
You're going to try to avoid that.
I'm going to try to avoid that. And so I'm asking questions about Edith, who was kind of made as a joke character originally and ended up being one of the most emotionally complex characters I've ever played. That's always how it goes, obviously.
Yeah, I find characters where I write like a really complex backstory, like I write kind of a novel in my head or on paper about how they're going to be. I do all that, and then everything that's a really great character moment, everything that gets me in the gut, is something that happened in game anyways. And so I have to, all of those things I wrote are details that don't have the weight of something that really happens in game, right? So sometimes you take a character who didn't have like a long architected plan, and they have more emotional weight for you and for the people around you because it developed naturally.
Yeah, absolutely. So ask questions about your character. How did they get into the situation that they're in? So if you're in an adventuring party, you need a damn good reason why you're in an adventuring party.
What went wrong with this person that they became a hero of all things?
Exactly. There are so many stable jobs that aren't adventuring. So we've got Granny Orc Barbarian on a quest to find her grandson. how did a barbarian live this long? Like, barbarians are notoriously short-lived.
Not a
um
lot of job security either.
yeah. Why is she on a quest to find her grandson? Where's her grandson? Like, where'd he go? That ended up being it was like a game of Where's Waldo, but like, where's Garuk? Like,
Mhm.
that was one of her major plot points. Um, and what does her being on this quest say about your character? So, what does the fact that she's lived this long say about her? Well, it says she's a survivalist. Uh, she will always make decisions that give her the best chance of living, regardless of the morality behind it, because that's how she's gotten this far already.
Yeah,
Uh,
what I like about that is one answer starts to inform others, right?
mhm.
Like once you decide, I need to have a reason why she survived. Being a little more morally gray isn't actually the only answer to that. But once you realize that's the answer that fits the other stuff you have, that may answer other questions you've got as you ask them, and it paints a picture without you're not. It's almost not additive; it's discovery.
Yeah, absolutely. Why is she looking for her grandson? Because she's a family first kind of woman. That's why. Um, and she also needs him for the family business. um, what else? She also keeps her promises because she's looking for her grandson. It's one of her. It's the reason why she's on this quest. It's why she's still involved. And it also speaks a little bit to like a questionable past that she has, that her grandson got up and surprise, like kidnapped by some people.
I'm gonna go out on a limb. I don't know this character very well, but was her quest ultimately her fault?
I don't think we actually got to that. The
Okay.
game,
Yeah.
we ended up getting a princess in another tower sort of your princess is in another castle sort of situation,
Hmm.
where we found someone who was going by the name of Grook, and it ended up being one of his friends.
Okay. Cool. Yep.
So, and the game ended up at like cutting off not too long after
Oh,
that.
gotcha.
So, let's continue on and talk a little bit about Lamia and like some of the inspiration around her and like how I made some of the decisions there.
Yeah, I think that's perfect because people are seeing this character and they haven't yet seen all the way into her head, so they've seen pieces of it. I think this will really click, especially because they're going to get to see this play out in front of them next week. 2 weeks.
Absolutely.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, I've been around the block with characters at this point. It's been like 5 years of LARPing, which I'd say is the most important part. But it's been like 8 at least. I don't know. Time is an illusion. We're in COVID, nothing matters anymore.
I hope so, because otherwise I have to say how long I've been role playing.
Yeah. So I've been around the block with characters. So that's all that matters. I have played clerics. I've played paladins. I love paladins. I have played diplomats, barbarians, rangers. I'm playing a bard archaeologist with my coworkers right now. But I've never played an edgy rogue. It is such a sadness. That is like a universal bucket list for people who play D&D. You must play an edgy rogue.
You got edgy rogue, horny barbarian. Horny bard. There's like a
Wow.
few that, yeah, yeah.
I don't want to do a horny bard.
But it's up there. It's up there in the
No,
archetypes.
it's one of the bucket list items.
Yeah.
But so we're literally in our character creation session, which we did as a group, by the way, and I find that to be really, really helpful. We're in our creation session, and somebody's like, "Oh, I want to be the child of a god," and I'm like, "Can I be your edgy twin?"
Yeah, I think this is cool stuff to reveal that Tucker had this idea to really play with family. Like once I sort of showed everybody some of the extra options that I could add to the game with the sources I've got out there, but also I'm giving people access to the ones that aren't out yet. And you can't have a character whose whole identity is based on who their parents are without getting into some family drama. And I liked that insight, that it didn't have to be like, I'm Odysseus or I'm Hercules and this is a big deal. It also, Tucker was really into how much of this family drama can we play out? Can everybody be family? Like, how deep are we going to go into this, right? And I love that, like, digging into that. And yeah, coming up with I'll let you continue too, because coming up with Lamia as a way to really balance that out was cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, and I definitely struggled with creating Lamia, for the record, because I wanted to play an edgy rogue type character, but I'm like, how do I make an edgy rogue real and relatable and something that I would actually enjoy playing? Because I do some writing in my spare time. Like, I like creating stories. I create stories at my LARPs. I live, breathe, talk, experience life as a series of stories. And I'm not about to play a character on a live stream for all of y'all. That is like very first level shallow. So how do you take something that's like a character archetype, like an edgy rogue, and make that something real, deep, more impactful? So, and that's where we're getting into from D&D Beyond, backgrounds, bonds, and ideals and flaws.
Yeah, it's interesting that they've added that to D&D, and I think people tend to overlook it or think it doesn't matter because it doesn't have a lot of mechanical use. But it's great that they put guides in there and rails on how to sort of carve out some story and force you to think about those things.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about background first. We already peeled back the curtain. We did collaborative backstories, and those are definitely the bonds that we have going on. I have a pre-existing bond with Nico, my literal twin. I've got a pre-existing bond with Dima, who we're still trying to figure this out, is kind of my patron, was my patron, is no longer my patron.
There's a little bit of ontological mystery there. Yeah. Right. And so, and I think every, like, of the 5 characters, I think the complete pentagram of lines between them exists. They're not all as deep and as rich as like twin siblings who are kind of defined by being twins and being opposites. Like, that's pretty heavy. But
we're not
like
opposites.
Right. Well, it's true. They're not really, but they might think they are. But like, even though, to get away from Lamia, to, like, even though Dima and Miraja had never met, Eric and Jamila did talk about, like, how are these characters going to be related? What would their differences be like, and how would that come out in a relationship, to make sure everyone had some idea of what it was going to be like to play with every combination of these characters, right? And I think I'm super pleased we did that. I'm super pleased everyone really bought into it, because I think not everyone's seen all of it yet, but I really think as the story progresses, I'm not sweating what I have to do, because those characters being connected is going to make a good story no matter what I do.
Mm-hmm. So trying to let's go back to the concept of the core for a minute. I want to play an edgy rogue. I'm not edgy, but God bless, I used to be. Like, all of us have gone through high school, okay? There's no shame in admitting that you were once real edgy. Take that awful, embarrassing experience and put it to good use by live streaming it for other people. So, in this case for Lamia, I am pulling on memories, thoughts, feelings from high school. And one thing that I've actually learned from Eric that I love, make playlists.
Yep.
I definitely have like high school rock songs in a playlist form for Lamia, and that listening to that music helps me figure out like how I define her, how I think of her, how she thinks of herself.
Mm-hmm. And I want to talk about music, because music is magic to me. I can't do it. I can't understand it, and so it influences me, right? It pulls me around. And I was some people watching me know this. I was a comics writer for a while. When I was trying to get started, I asked people for advice. It's an amazing community of people, all the pro creators. There's like 5 to 10 times as many people who want to work in comics as possibly could be working at any time. And so they could be really territorial, but they're not. They're always giving people advice on how to steal their jobs. And I remember I was talking to, I think it was Fred Van Lente, and I said, like, one tip, what's something that I wouldn't think of that's going to help my writing? And he said, character playlists. Get on Pandora or whatever and start to craft a bunch of, for characters or for stories that you're writing, have a bunch of songs that bring you into that space, because it's environmental psychology. you can put on the right playlist, and it's like after 20 minutes of listening, you're in that space. Especially when comics. I used to write about 5 different books at a time. Not because I was publishing 5 books at a time, but because I was trying to keep busy. And a lot of the pros are in the same boat, right? And so to be able to switch between characters and put them
Mm-hmm.
on and understand them as you're writing them, I think it's great. And I'm glad that that came into this.
Mm-hmm. So, moving on to bonds that define, we've got this intense sibling relationship. There is like a deep mutual caring. There are differences, the sensation of being pitted against each other because of your wants and desires, and yet at the same time being so close and wanting to make sure the other person is safe and healthy and okay. Um, and I think this is so much better with Tucker, who I know is like a phenomenal role player on the other side. Like, yeah, that's some good shit. And then we've also got this really formative bond to our mother, which is like, she's the reason I left home. I couldn't do that. She caused this major change in my life. So, how do these bonds shape my ideals? And how do they shape my flaws? How do they shape my wants, my desires, and my expectations? And so, when you get into thinking about ideals and flaws and how they're linked into all this, really, I think the best ideals and flaws are really two sides of the same coin because ultimately they're kind of your driving forces, and you can make them real by tying them into those bonds, those backstories. Ideals and flaws are caused by the backstory, but they affect the present. So they can be changed, but in like ideals and flaws can absolutely evolve just as you as a real person, your ideals and flaws evolve as well. But when you do it, make sure you do it in a way that keeps your backstory in mind. So, for the example with Lamia, her ideals and flaws are shaped. Well, one of her ideals and flaws is related to her leaving because of her mother. She considers that a flaw. But at the same time, it's an ideal because she decided to break that chain to stop what was going on and to leave and pursue a healthier life for herself.
Right, Chief. Yeah, we talked a little bit about too how that echoes in her actions. So I guess it was in episode 2. um, I remember how this came up when we were talking after the episode, but there was this interesting thing where she wants to not be this sort of defined by being this hard worker and this quester and being exactly like her mother expected. But for a good chunk of the adventure, she was being very practical, and she was looking after her brother, and she was she was investigating everything, and she was trying to stay a step ahead, and she was on mission so
Yeah,
much. And I think those contrasts are important. You don't have you don't good contrasts are internal conflicts, I guess, is what I like about that, right? And that's that two sides of the same coin, I guess.
that was definitely something we didn't share on screen.
Yep.
Um, it's something I'd like to play out more,
That's right. Yep.
rather than tell you all here, but here we are. But just keeping in mind, and I believe this is actually something from psychology. Who was I? Who am I right now? Where am I going? And who do I want to be? And if you look at your character, and you can look at yourself this way too, if you examine your character's experiences in this manner, while you're playing them, you can like reproject in a different direction or change the way your flaws and ideals are interacting with you. Okay. Ian, do you think there's anything else that we should discuss based on ideas and flaws? Do you think I should give more examples?
I'm trying to think. So yeah, I was just trying to think about ways that we could help people flesh that out for themselves.
Yeah.
We're the only ones on camera here, so I'm trying
Mhm.
to imagine the person who needs this advice or who's playing with it. That's what I keep coming back to, and I think the core, to wrap this around to what you were saying before, these were pieces of yourself. Part of this was, there's a D&D archetype that I want to play, but there was also like, how do I make this about me so that it's personal for me, so that it's connected to me, so I can have feelings about it, so that I create a good character. And I think when you think about ideals and flaws, you want to find someone who either values something. I think about different ways of looking at this, I guess, right? So is it someone who values the same thing as you the same amount? That's a fine starting point. What if they value something you value, but you've chosen to have them be way over the top, right? Like they're a little too into freedom or rebellion, right? Like I think we all, we want to examine ourselves when we put together these characters, I think. Or I think that makes good stories, at least. So is this going to be someone the person watching the show, what's something that you are mostly comfortable with about yourself, but that you might want to examine? So find that value of yours, or that thing that you think is a flaw, and decide, how do I turn that value into a flaw? How do I turn that flaw into a value? I did this with the character who has like a bunch of names now because of all this stuff happening. I have this honesty thing. I really am obsessed with honesty, and I'm clueless about subterfuge. And so I decided, like, I should live that a little. I should dig into that. So I made a character who couldn't lie. Right? I made a character who, like, really didn't get it if other people were lying, and if he did find out, he kind of snapped. So I took that thing about myself and I turned it way up. Right? And so I think, ask yourself, what's that thing about me, or what are some of those things about me that might make good characters? And I think that what Clove is saying is, what in their backstory made them different from you, or made that their driving force, or made that a flaw, or made that a particularly strong moral of theirs. Bring that into the very core of a character. Don't make it a side thing, right? Like that can be like high concept. One of the things this is cheating, but D&D characters can be super high concept. RPG characters can be like, take one little thing about me and just make it like the big banner thing about the person. Don't be afraid to do that. And don't be afraid to try different ideas and flesh out. We've talked about those questions, right? Like, start with that thing, and you might end up with 20 character ideas by going through some of the stuff about yourself, just because you're going to start saying, well, what about this and this? Oh, but if they were like this, they'd go in this direction. But if they were like this, they'd go in that direction. So I encourage you all to play with this. I encourage you all to, draw it out, write it out, dig into it when you're trying to create a character. I think that's the stuff that I think we can't help people here with live, is that they can tear into it for hours, and we're here for 30 minutes to an hour.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I actually think this is a really good jumping off point with you talking about that character where it was one of your core traits that you pulled off and made more intense. You just took that trait of yours that you already had and like bumped it up. Let's transition to talking about character bleed.
Yeah.
So bleed is kind of exactly what it sounds like. I'm trying to figure out what's a good way. Oh, I really like the visual of like color bleeding across a cloth,
Ink.
or
Yep.
when you, ink, or when you wet a paper towel, you just watch the water kind of like go up it at a very quick and alarming rate. And I want you to think of that contamination, that like spreading effect. Think of that as your character on your personality and your personality on your character, because ultimately you are playing that character, and that character is a piece of you.
Right. And what that really means is things that you feel are going to become things that your character feels, and things your character feel are going to become things that you feel. Like, I think about the ink metaphor. Imagine that you're writing on a piece of paper about your character, and there's a lot of ink and it's very intense. Some of that ink is going to bleed through onto the pages below. That's I think where the bleed metaphor comes from. And I think a lot of people, when they talk about role playing, especially in certain LARP concepts, bleed used to be a bad word. People used to talk about bleed as if it's a thing you don't want, you have to avoid it. I don't think so. I think bleed is a thing you have to understand and smart about and use.
Yeah, I'd like to talk more about bleed before going into like the arguments about it. But so bleed isn't like something that's inherently bad. It's a thing to be aware of. Because I think it's important when you choose ideals, flaws, backgrounds, etc., to keep in mind that this character that you're making is going to affect you. This character is going to affect the way you think. And there are absolutely academic papers, not on LARPing, but on the creation of emotion. If you look at Arlie Hochschild, she talks about how the more you encourage certain feelings, the more those feelings like exist. So if I were, for example, to play a character that's very angry, I would start feeling anger a hell of a lot more, which is a thing that actually happened. I'll talk about it in a bit. So be aware that bleed is a thing. It is not bad, but just figure out which traits you want to choose that you're okay having bleed through. Like Ian, I guess you were totally okay having the intense honesty and maybe the annoyance at lies bleed into your personal life.
And the inability to lie well turned up to 11. You know what I mean? Like, and the inability to notice it turned up to 11. Like, let's take a thing that, because I wanted to confront it, I wanted to have those feelings in a space where they were fictionalized and controlled, and it's not entirely safe, but it's definitely one remove, and so it lets you, after the events or after the games, I would look back and say, oh, I learned something about me there. Right,
Yeah.
and that's helpful for a good character and to make role playing a positive life experience, not just a game.
Yeah. As a general note, I would absolutely encourage like everyone to roleplay just because it gives you so many different emotional opportunities. Things that you would never be able to live in real life. You can do that in a game
Yeah.
and you can like explore yourself emotionally and develop an emotional intelligence that you otherwise might not be able to have in an environment that is safe and generally consensual
Yeah.
and
Um,
also not real. So,
Yeah, and that's actually, I should say, that's why I was so excited when you brought this idea to me, is because the first episode of D&D 101 is like, how can I squeeze all of the rules and concepts of D&D into 1 hour? And
mhm.
that's a lot of one side of role playing, and some people probably think it's all of role playing, but to have the very next episode just not even talk about rules and mechanics hardly at all, and to be about, this is how we make fictional people who are interesting parts of our real lives is exactly the opposite end of that spectrum. And I think it's important to remember that role playing works so well because it's not just one of those things. And especially, it's not just a tactics game. It's not just orcs fighting elves, right? It's people interacting with people. Uh, Real person interacting with fictional person, interacting with another fictional person who is another real person, and all the lines that creates, right? And we walk away with these great experiences. I mean, we're not going to do it here, but Clove and I share a LARP, but we didn't really play at the same time, and so we can talk about these stories about like these things that happen that we have totally different. For me, it's uh, my life, or my fictional life. For Clove, it's literally ancient history, I suspect at this point, right?
It's
And there,
he's an old man.
well, I did. I mean, I stopped a while ago, and I was part of some big epic stuff in some small ways. But those experiences, like I think they color our, like they color my mental language. Like sometimes in life, you find yourself telling a story, the same story all the time, and we have those ones that are actually happened. But sometimes the example I have that illustrates an important point is from fiction because I lived that fiction. Um, so I think that the impact of our characters on our lives is a huge positive thing. So I'm glad that you're bringing up bleed because, right, it's why these games help us grow as people.
Absolutely. So pulling back to an example of bleed. Remember I told you guys about that grandmotherly actual legit grandma orc barbarian. For me, she was both a good and a bad bleed. On the one hand, she had this really interesting moral ambiguity that caused all the players around us to kind of like think deeper on certain subjects and look at the D&D alignment system, which I'm really glad good and evil have kind of been thrown out the window due to recent decisions, and I'm very here for it.
For folks who don't know, there's been announcements that the idea of inherently good and evil races aren't going to exist. It doesn't make sense that all orcs are bad and all elves are good or whatever. It comes from some very racist undertones in a lot of the source material that's just very dated, and that we finally realized is problematic, or some of us finally already knew. And we're seeing a lot of players do cool things with really re-examining what alignment means and asking questions like, does my character's alignment determine their actions, or do their actions determine their alignment? Uh, so I'm glad to see progress. Great. Right up.
Yeah. So she ended up being a technically evil character, but like maybe lawful neutral. It was a whole combination of things. Basically, she didn't fit on the like the 3x3 morality scale at all, and that was really intricate and really beautiful to play, and ended up playing really well with the other people in our game. That being said, Rage Barbarian, she ended up having a really intense anger, and that was part of what kept her alive. And I had to step back from the game for, I want to say, 3 months because her anger bled into me and it got to me. And I think it's really important to know that, like, you're going to play this character, and there will be times when you have to step back. You might have to re-examine: is this character a good character for me to be playing?
Because you're
So,
putting yourself in them. You're not just not something you're writing. It's something you're being at some level. Even in a pretty superficial D&D game, you have to sit there at the table and have all the reactions that people have to the character back on you.
but like, as a woman, I've been raised not really to like feel anger or deal with anger. Throughout most of my childhood, I instead channeled anger into sadness directly, and that was a way for me to cope with it. But I through that campaign, I really channeled it. But it meant that, like, the ripe age of young 20 something, I had to now deal with this new emotion that I was suddenly feeling for the first time. So, am I glad that I now know how to cope with this emotion? Yes. But would I play a character that encourages me to feel this way? Not necessarily. I don't really want that in my life.
Yeah, and
Um,
that's, I mean, and I just want to say there that that's, again, it's one of those failures. It's not a failure.
I don't
Like,
really consider it a
yeah,
failure, but like, it was an unexpected consequence.
right.
Um, I didn't think that she would be that angry.
And you can choose to steer a character in a direction that, actually, I want to really tell people this because this is something we didn't talk about beforehand. It's
Yep.
a concept I've come across in especially LARPs, which I call role playing too hard, which is when you become so convinced that there's only one thing your character would do and that you must do it, even
Mm,
if it makes you miserable or makes everyone around you miserable. And so one of the things I think that this idea that failure isn't an end state, right, is don't be afraid to steer your character away from places that are too bad for you, right? You can get a certain distance from things and benefit from things that are uncomfortable, but if you get to the point where you decide it's not healthy, it's okay to stop playing a character, and it's okay to come up with reasons for them to change, right? Because these are stories that evolve.
it's actually, I don't play the same way as you in that regard.
Interesting.
I usually play through the really, really tough parts, and I use like the bad feelings my character is having to, and I go up to people and I ask them for help in character. Because I feel like the bad feelings themselves are a motivation to fix things.
Right. Okay. Yeah, but playing through is still a decision to try to get to another
It
place.
is a decision, and there are alternatives, like you mentioned. And if it's not healthy for you, take a step back. Like, I took a step back from Edith. Um, there were times when I used to play a Dryad character. There were times when I had to take steps back from her because things just got really dark, and I ended up creating an alternative character for that world. And that character is wise and good and monogamous, and people just loved her. So it was very nice having that escape where, yes, I had this character who had a lot of meaning and intentionality, but if I couldn't play her, I could still enjoy the world as someone who didn't have a lot of problems.
Yep.
So, another example, going back to that original example from before when I was talking about Alana and me trying to get over my fear of the dark, here's a case where bleed is really helpful. I knew that playing a character who either wasn't afraid of the dark or who got over her fear of the dark, I knew that would bleed into me. So if I can grow my character in this way, in a world where shadows in the woods actually can kill you, and if I could grow to become comfortable in the woods in that sort of situation, then I can become comfortable in the woods in real life. So role playing is a beautiful place. Like, it can be a place where you can work through things and heal.
Yeah, absolutely.
So ultimately, in my argument, I think bleed isn't bad. I think it's pretty good, in fact. And I think a lot of people use bleed in positive ways, as I said, to like help them work through stuff. Um, and you can just really learn and grow in new ways. I picked up skills for my current job. Like I started trying them out in the LARP world, which is kind of odd. I did more planning oriented tasks. I learned how to direct the flow of LARP plot from the perspective of someone who doesn't have a lot of control. And I really built those skills up, and I used the LARP environment as a trial place. So you can bleed those skills into you. Those skills can bleed back out. It is a fluid,
Yeah.
fluid back and forth. And as long as you're aware of it, you can harness it to your own benefit.
Yeah, I did almost in a weird way almost the opposite. I was going to be an academic. I started a PhD. I was figured I'd be a professor someday, and then life took another turn. My career took another turn, and I always got to hold on to that piece of myself because I could just decide that if I like being a teacher and I like being a mentor, I can bring that into my games, even if I don't have. And eventually, it came full circle. You know, I had a tech career, and I held on to the idea of being wizard professor. I love that stuff. And eventually I came back around and I ended up being a pretty senior executive for a while. And my job was to mentor people again. And because I held on to it, I had been developing those skills, even though that part of my like professional life was on pause. Like on weekends, I was still a teacher and a professor and a grown up who was there to support people. And it let me very seamlessly bring that part of myself back into my job when I wouldn't have had a lot of practice otherwise, because my job was fixing software, right? But my passion was helping people grow, and I got to just sort of like keep that on the boil.
Absolutely. So we've talked about a bunch of things. We've talked about this core that you can pull from. We've talked about these bonds and ideals and backgrounds and how you can create them and like build a character even more. We've talked about bleed and the positive and negative effects of it. So, like, building off of these things we've already learned, going above and beyond. If you really want to look at like the technical details of your character, another thing you can do to kind of like build the role play, build the depth of the character even more, is have each skill that your character has learned, have them had it learned due to some circumstance in their life. For example, I played a ranger, and she had the ability to talk to animals because she was from the the in-game equivalent of the Amazon, and the animals there are pretty deadly. So you want to be able to talk to them and tell them not to bite you. This helps you decide what spells you choose, what feats you choose. If you're not interested in like the power gaming route, if you're not playing Pathfinder, for example. And
Great.
this also deepens your character's thoughts and actions because it helps you really think about how would your character have chosen this spell.
And that can go both ways.
Through. How so?
In that you can either decide, okay, because of my character's story, they would have wanted to learn this skill. And I do that, right? Like, oh, well, this person would have history because that's who they are. That's how I describe them. But you can do something else where if you really want them to have some mechanical piece, you can say, okay, but why? Let's write into the story now. Like, this spell is a weird spell for this. I know, like, it does a lot of damage, and I want this spell, but it's a weird one for this character to have. Why does this character have this one fire spell? Well, maybe there's a reason. You know, you come up with a story for that.
I've got a great one for that, cool. Actually. The fantasy, like the angel human race, I think it's called an Aasimar?
Yeah, Aasimar. Yeah.
Aasimar? I'm not terribly
The I is in the middle, so it's As-E-Mar. And the way I said that did not help it make more sense, but it's how I remember.
It's okay. We'll move on from there. Whatever it is, y'all can Google it.
They're like celestial folk, angel folk.
Yeah. So these like kind of celestial folk. We had one of them in our in a D&D party once, and his perception was so high that we called him God Eyes. It ended up, it's like, why does this guy have such a ridiculous perception? And it ended up being that my character and his character had a bond. My character was his older sister of like way before he was born, like 18 years or something. She had been kicked out of the house because the parents were not thrilled with what she was doing with her life. And the whole time he grew up, they were trying to cover up the fact that she existed, lest he be tainted by her presence. He was tainted later. She was a paladin of freedom. It was beautiful. And so he spends his whole life like being like, I feel like these people are lying to me, and I like looking around for clues and stuff like that.
Yep.
And so his perception skills, just like that's where he's investing. He's just becoming curious and searching for things and like being like, I feel like you guys are lying to me. So,
I'm missing something, so I'm going to look for it.
exactly.
Yep.
And then finds out like after tragic death that she was in fact his sister, and he's like, bloody hell, my heart, it's been ripped out.
Good drama.
Very good drama.
More good sibling family drama too.
Yes, exactly. Apparently, that's what I'm here for.
Do you have siblings?
You
like, said that. Yeah, you're an older sibling, right?
I am the eldest. I have a younger brother. Anyway,
I don't write good. So this is weird. I don't write good sibling stuff into characters unless someone pushes me, because I'm an only child, and so it is again. It's something that you pulled from your life that. Both consciously, and we talked about how you're going to consciously sometimes build a character out of these pieces, but I think whether you watch this talk or not, you've probably done a lot of this stuff, right? And that there's an example. You didn't necessarily make conscious decision to make sibling relationships part of all of your characters because you wanted to bring that thing from your life. It also just happens on its own.
Mm-hmm. I don't think I usually focus on that for most of my characters, but especially if there's another player who wants that and who wants to create that interaction, I think that's super fun. So
have that in your toolkit.
Yeah. It's a really good way to have your characters go back and forth and to create some like extra tension. Drama. So
go ahead. Yeah.
Wrapping up. You have your core values. You know who you are. You pull from them to create your character, and you can change a few things if you want. And that's like the core of your role-playing character. We have using backgrounds to deepen your character, and these bonds to help build your backgrounds, your ideals and flaws, which are two sides of the same coin, in order to flesh out the character and give them a lot more meat and depth. We talked about bleed. And then we also had the little extra bonus of choosing skills and spells based on who your character is, or at the very least explaining why you have certain skills and spells.
Yeah. I wanted to mention something that I forgot to mention before. But maybe it's good that it's at wrap up because it's not interrupting, which I try not to do and fail sometimes. One of the things we're talking about here is, and we started with this and we didn't really address it, but hope I'm not spoiling something here, but you wrote Lamia to be an edgy rogue. Mm-hmm. What's Lamia's class? Or at least what's Lamia's class not?
I used Eldritch Blast. So
yes,
like
exactly.
Obviously I'm a warlock.
I know. Yeah. So one of the things I like to remember is that the building blocks of the rules and especially the names they have and the building blocks of your character and the names they have don't always have to have a one-to-one relationship. So
please.
You're gonna get to play with the rules of your character's like capital B background, like the things that D&D 5th edition has that you can choose in D&D Beyond or elsewhere. Those bonds, ideals, flaws, those are words in the rules, but those are also just things. So even if you don't use all of those concepts as like the literal pieces of your character's mechanical and functional build, you want to think about you can go beyond those things. You can have more of those things and different things in the rules and in the story. Great example is you're a rogue. You're an edgy rogue without being a rogue, right?
Well, why would you have that preconception?
Yeah, right. But that's when do that with your character. Don't be afraid to think about. The other example I can give away for free here because I talked about it in the character creation part of episode 1. Tanya is a barbarian. There is a barbarian feature called Rage. Capital R, Rage, as a barbarian feature only works in a certain way. You spend a bonus action, and as long as you've either dealt damage or taken, attacked or taken damage in a turn, you can continue to use this ability, yada yada. But that Rage is the name of a rule, but your character doesn't actually have to have their Rage ability powered by anger, by rage. So hers is powered by something more nuanced, right?
She actually talked about that in episode. She talked about how it's channeled by a like protective aura.
Yeah. And sort of there's like a patience to it. There's like a calmness to it. And it's sort of things that get pent up and then, I like that. And there's a lot of joke. I would like to cry. But I do think that remember, and barbarian's a great example because they put that one word and it's such a clear word that has a meaning, emotional meaning, and it's so easy to see how it doesn't actually have to be that in the rules. So don't be afraid to make the flavor and the color and the rich the emotion and descriptive parts of your character be different from the names that the rules happen to give them. And I think that goes here, especially your character's background can go beyond the capital B background you choose. They're going to have that, and that can help you flesh out your character, but there's more to that background than what's, you choose sailor, but maybe you're not just a sailor. What kind of sailor were you, and what kind of person were you digging? The point that I wanted to add there.
Absolutely. So, like, thank you for adding that. And that really concludes, like, the meat of this discussion, which is creating a character that is something that you can play, and how you can deepen them with it still being true to yourself. But I want to definitely add this last bit. So you've created a character. Now what? Like, it comes to actually playing the character. And I mentioned at the beginning, I don't like the word pretend because I really recommend against surface level acting and pretending to be a character. The whole reason we created this core that you're pulling from is so that you just are the character. When you play the character,
Body.
this is you. You are telling your story. It might not align with like you, the person, but this is your emotional core that's just in a different setting. So it's more impactful. You're more invested. And it feels right, and you can react in ways that aren't faking it. You're not faking it till you make it. You're just making it. So
Yeah, and I think then there's an important closed loop there, which is that if you want to role play a character well, you have to be able to act them out. And we talked about how that's not voices, but it's embodying, it's being.
yeah,
And that may
yeah.
mean how do I make good decisions, or how do I say things that feel true to a character? One of the choices that's involved there is taking things that are true to you so that it's already there. But the other part is to being able to, once you, this is, I think, maybe I'm summarizing your lesson to make sure I understand it.
Uh-huh.
When you choose those differences, I think what you're saying is once you have those and have that other fictional person who's not just you, you've got a combination of the real you inside of that and an ability to put on that character. And don't think like you're not calculating, you're not doing math. It's, like when you catch a ball, you don't actually figure out the x equals y squared.
Oh my god.
Right? You just reach for it because you're in that. And with a character, it's the same thing. If you really put a character on and let yourself feel what they're feeling, you don't have to ask, stop, and calculate what they would do. Just catch the ball. You just know in that moment, Lami is going to disagree with her brother on this, or Tamlin is going to be mad that someone is lying to him, right? And I think that's an important lesson, is that whether you whether you can fully do the method, as they call it, right? There's a benefit to putting it on. Maybe this is something I'm adding. I don't think it's what you're saying, but also don't be afraid to know how to take it off. Remember that the benefit of these characters is that we're in and out of them. We take it off. We can step away from the game. We can't step away from our lives. I bet a lot of us are feeling a lot of that right now.
Definitely on that note, I want to build off of that. Self-care is huge. And there have been times when, because of my character, I have had to self-care. And I think that being aware of when you need to step away in self-care is a extremely valuable skill. I'm trying to think of an example. Oh, I've got one. My character, or rather, my character got like super murdered at a LARP, like sitting there dead in the grass as you do. And my character's significant other ended up getting like dragged away, and she couldn't have seen it because she was dead. But like I saw it, and I knew exactly what was going on and how this was relevant to plot. And I'm like, oh my god, my character's significant other is fucked. Like this is like how the character permanently dies. She was freaking, and I was freaking out on behalf of my character who couldn't have known it, but I had been in character for like 2 days already, so it was just like so ingrained and so enmeshed in how I was acting that it was hard for me to separate from my character. I literally had like asthma / panic attack Just because I was freaking out, and I was also sitting in the cold, wet grass for a while. And my cold-induced asthma definitely kicked up, and I ended up in his car with the heat on, like taking my inhaler and just like trying to calm down. And you know what? Like we took 2 hours, and that was what I needed. And so I made sure that I had someone who was safe. I made sure that I had my medicine, my inhaler, and I made sure that we like emotionally worked through that. We talked about it, and then the plot got resolved in character.
Yeah.
When we both came back.
Yeah, and for the viewers, one thing to remember is like the mantra we used to have is real life comes first. You have to look after your own actual well-being. You shouldn't play so hard or stay in a situation that's going to hurt you. And so be mindful. And one of the things that we'll talk about in other episodes is some of the techniques for that, and some of the community techniques for that, where it's about everyone else's safety. We talked a little bit on the show about our safety mechanisms. I'm actually working on putting together kind of a formalized version of that I might even do a Kickstarter around the cards, so that we can, spread that. So I guess we've talked a lot about some of the places that you can put yourself in danger. We don't have enough time here and the preparation here to make you fully prepared for some of those things if you dig into them. So I just want to point out that there are more resources out there, whether it's another episode of our show or people that you can look into. I just want to make sure that this beautiful thing that we do can be pretty emotionally jarring, and we won't be able to cover all the ways to take care of yourself. Good stories emotionally impact people, a bad thing. But knowing where you are mindful not to harm anyone else and mindful not to harm yourself in doing that is definitely sort of D&D 102 on this episode. It's the advanced class you're going to want to take too, or figure out.
The master class. Are we allowed to say that?
I don't know. I only do 101 here because I'm an idiot, and so I don't want to. No.
Anyway, y'all, that really wraps up what I'm here to present. I hope this was helpful for all of you. It was really fun to develop this chat so that I could share this knowledge with all of y'all. Hope it helps. Go make some awesome characters.
This was great. Thank you so much, Clove. I'm going to do a quick repeat of our announcements and tell y'all what's next. So a reminder on the schedule. After this episode drops off, in a couple minutes, a couple moments probably, we will start the encore of episode 2. So if you stay on the channel, you're going to get to watch that. Also, a reminder, next week is 4th of July, where we decided not to do a live game because not everyone is going to be available. So we'll be running sort of a mega encore of both the D&D 101 episode that's designed to lead you into the game and both of the first 2 episodes. So if you haven't gotten a chance to catch up yet, that's the perfect chance. I'm going to be around for both or all of these reruns and things, so that if people are in the chat, I can join you. 2 weeks from now, on July 11th, will be when we're back for our new live episode 3 of Heroes of Four Worlds. Again, we're going to be going from the Halls of Prophecy probably into the world by now. I talked about these 4 worlds, and the core of that is the world. It's the place that I keep saying is made of dirt, that all these weird characters who mostly aren't from there are going to be experiencing. So I'm looking forward to taking them there. Next week, so that's got this week, next week, 2 weeks from now, all taken care of. And after that, it just repeats. Get a D&D 101 episode, you get a new live episode of the campaign, and so on. I mentioned the fundraiser. At this point, I should probably throw up.
Yes, you did.
Yep. I want to mention it again. Forth.me/color of change. You can go there and you can give directly to the charity, or every dollar you spend on the shop or the Patreon by July 4th is going right into there. That does literally mean, like on NPR, you can like spend like $120 and you get like a $20 wind-up radio, and that's a pretty cool deal. Well, imagine you could spend the $120 on a couple of really good games, and all of that went to the charity. That's what we're doing. So just keep that in mind. That's the short version. Again, it's forth.me is the shop. Forth.me/Patreon is the place where you can sign up and be a member. Forth.me/color of change is the fundraiser that we're doing. You'll notice a pattern there. I try to make it easy. I mentioned the Twitch stuff, so just remember you can follow and sub. I said enough about that. The stream will be back in a few moments with a repeat performance of episode 2 of Heroes of Four Worlds for those of you who want to catch up. And luckily, just like on the real show, as always, the last word goes to Clove.
Thanks, y'all. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting with you all tonight. Can't wait for the next time that I'm on stream with you all. So I hope you have a good night.
Good night. Thank you all.